You've probably heard a lot these days about the war between Israel and Hamas. There's so much information, misinformation, disinformation, and speculation out there that it's hard to wrap your head around the situation. But don't worry, we're here to set the record straight. We're here to tell the truth. My name is Noah, and this is Israel in Focus. Everything you need to know about the Hamas-Israel war. Let's break it down. Saturday, October 7th, was an ordinary morning in Israel. The joyful Jewish festival of Sukkot had just recently ended, and the holiday of Simchat Torah had just begun. Then, at 6:30 a.m. local time, non-stop red alert sirens suddenly began as thousands of rockets were fired from Gaza into Israel by Hamas terrorists, mainly towards the southern communities living next to the border. At the same time, in a premeditated attack that had been planned for over a year, thousands of armed terrorists, mainly on motorcycles, all of whom were part of Hamas, which is an internationally recognized terrorist group driven by Islamist extremism and genocidal racism against Jews, breached the Gaza-Israel border in the south of Israel with one goal: to massacre as many Jews as possible. Hamas murdered, raped, beheaded, and butchered 1,200 people, most of whom were innocent Jewish civilians. Not only was this attack completely unprovoked, it came after Israel had just increased the amount of civilians from Gaza permitted to work in Israel. Put simply, before October 7th, there was a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas. On October 7th, that ceasefire was broken by Hamas, which committed one of the worst atrocities of the 21st century. In fact, this attack was so horrific that it'll go down in history as the largest number of Jews murdered in a single day since the Holocaust. Before we continue, we have to make something crystal clear. These unthinkable actions were not committed because of a territorial dispute, and they weren't an uprising against oppression. This was simple: a plan to cause maximum loss of civilian life, regardless of age, gender, or anything else. You don't need to take our word for it. Hamas terrorists documented everything themselves. The amount of footage they filmed on October 7th is abundant and undeniable. Hamas was proud of their savagery. Some of the terrorists called their parents to boast about their actions.
أنا قاعد أكلمك من جوبا بسيم. افتح الواتس تبعه قول له وين شوف كيف قتله، شوف كيف قتلك بيدي يابا، ابنك قتل يهود، هاي دخل بسيم يابا. الله أكبر، ربنا يحميك يا رب، ربنا يحميك يابا، ربنا يحميك يابا. أكلمك من جوال يهودية قتلتها وقتلت جوزها. الله أكبر، الله أكبر ولله الحمد. الله أكبر ولله الحمد.
Some live-streamed footage on Facebook off of phones they had stolen from the innocent people they murdered. The atrocities committed that day are too much to go through in one single video. Hamas didn't just butcher people. They reveled in their crimes. They tortured the bodies of the dead and the living. They burned houses. They burned human beings. They targeted innocent communities filled with peace-loving families. They targeted a music festival with many teenagers and young adults, including my friends, who just wanted to celebrate love and peace. They targeted military bases, and then they kidnapped Israelis and non-Israeli civilians, including mothers, babies, children, and Holocaust survivors, and dragged them into Gaza, while mobs of Palestinian extremists beat them up and spat on the hostages. And yes, Hamas documented that too. Over 240 individuals were kidnapped and taken into Gaza. Imagine if these were your parents, your siblings, your classmates, your friends, or your children. Hamas showed no mercy, no matter the pleas of the innocent people. All of this happened in just a few hours on that nightmare of a day. A majority of these casualties were civilians: women, children, the elderly, paramedics, firefighters, and security forces. While Hamas's primary target was Jewish Israelis, they also murdered 9 Bedouin Israelis, including 6 children, when Hamas rockets fell on their house in Rahat. The impact of this attack reverberated globally, with reported casualties and missing individuals from 42 different countries. The toll on Israel has been devastating, with over 1,200 people murdered and over 3,000 rockets fired from Gaza just on that horrific day alone. Since then, there have been more than 10,000 wounded total, and counting. Additionally, over 10,000 rockets have been fired since October 7th. If the United States lost the same percentage of its population as Israel did since October 7th, it would look like 44,000 Americans murdered by terrorists. Let that sink in. So, what happened next? Israel began preparations for the war that was forced upon it and entered Gaza with two main goals. One, completely eradicating Hamas, and two, freeing all of the hostages. Hamas's attack was so brutal that it left Israel with no choice. Almost every Israeli was affected by this horrific day. So many lost loved ones. So many are still waiting for their loved ones to return. Bodies are still being identified. Israel's reality had to completely change so such an attack can never happen again. To make matters even more complicated, in Israel's north, another war front was opened against it by the Iranian regime-backed terrorist group Hezbollah, which controls much of Lebanon and which has begun attacking Israel from the north with rockets, guided missiles, sniper fire, and more on a daily basis since October 7th. The Hamas and Hezbollah attacks combined have resulted in the internal displacement of at least 200,000 Israelis. Luckily, Israel's strongest ally and friend, the United States, has been aiding Israel in its fight against terrorism by sending naval ships as an important deterrent to ensure that a complete regional war will not erupt. As a result of this terrorist onslaught, Israel was dragged into a war that it didn't ask for, a war for its very existence. In the words of Hamas leader Yahya Sinwar, October 7th was just a rehearsal. As long as it exists, Hamas will continue its campaign of massacring innocent Israelis. And so, Israeli ground forces began counterterrorism operations against Hamas starting in the northern Gaza Strip. And the war has been ongoing ever since. Rockets from Gaza continue to rain down towards innocent Israeli civilians. Every day, countless Israeli and non-Israeli families await the return of their loved ones from Hamas captivity, their loved ones who are kept in unthinkable, inhumane conditions. To this day, many families still have no homes, and to make matters even worse, another player has also joined the war. The Yemen-based Houthi rebels, another Iranian proxy, who've launched rockets and missiles towards Israel's southern city of Eilat, a city where many internally displaced Israelis were seeking shelter. They've also been targeting ships they either identify as Israeli or that are headed towards Israel. As of now, Israel has almost gained full control over the northern Gaza Strip, uncovering countless terror tunnels under schools, kindergartens, and most notably, we've showed the world that Gaza's Shifa hospital is and has been used as a Hamas terrorist stronghold, including hiding and murdering some of the hostages inside the hospital itself. Many Hamas terrorists have surrendered thus far, and Israel even managed to find and rescue a kidnapped IDF soldier, Private Ori Megidish. A temporary ceasefire was eventually put into place for 6 days, beginning on November 24th, during which time 103 innocent hostages were released from Gaza, 30 of whom were foreign nationals. During the ceasefire, Israel released over 200 Palestinian terrorists and criminals who were being held in Israeli jails. Many families were finally reunited. Sadly, that ceasefire was eventually broken by Hamas, who amongst other things began to once again fire barrages of rockets into Israel. That left 119 hostages and 18 bodies still in Gaza, still in the hands of Hamas terrorists. And here we are, with an ongoing war, a complicated war, a war for Israel's survival and for the sake of humanity. And if that hard reality wasn't enough, antisemitism didn't wait to once again rear its ugly head, with many joining in the shocking call for the destruction of Israel by any means necessary. Even before Israel entered Gaza, people were chanting joyfully on the streets about Hamas's massacre from Sydney to London. It's gotten so bad that Jews around the world are facing threats that nobody thought could possibly ever happen in our lifetime. It's at the point that posters of innocent Jewish and non-Jewish hostages who are being held in Hamas captivity in Gaza are being torn down. From anti-Semitic lynching attempts in Russia, to burning down Jewish-owned restaurants, to Jewish students being afraid to embrace their identity on campus, history is once again repeating itself. Jews are the scapegoats for the world's evils. Blaming Israel once again became the new trend. The events of October 7th are now being denied or even justified. Israel's being held to a standard of war no other nation has ever faced, leaving many Israelis and Jews feeling that instead of being given the time and the respect to grieve their tremendous losses, they now have to defend their very right to exist. All the while, Israel does everything in its power to never harm civilians, abiding by international law in a complicated area where Hamas embeds itself in the civilian population. Make no mistake, Israel does everything in its power and beyond to make sure innocent civilians are not harmed, including dropping millions of pamphlets, opening humanitarian corridors, and calling to warn civilians that they'll be striking Hamas terror targets in the vicinity. While Israel does everything in its power to preserve human lives, Hamas does everything it can to end them, and it must be held accountable for its crimes against humanity. Okay, so now what? On one side, we have a democratic country fighting for its right to exist in peace and security, and on the other side, we have a genocidal terrorist organization that puts its own people in harm's way in order to massacre innocent Israelis. A premature ceasefire would only benefit Hamas by giving them time to rearm and regain their strength.
But remember, there was a ceasefire on October 6th that Hamas broke by their barbaric assault on peaceful civilians and their kidnapping, their killing, their beheading, their terrible, inhumane savagery. There was a ceasefire. It did not hold because Hamas chose to break it.
All of this can end today if Hamas surrenders and releases all of the hostages. The people of Israel are resilient and will overcome the Hamas massacre. If there's something we know for certain, it is that the Israeli spirit is amazing. From the ashes of grief, so many uplifting stories have arisen. Stories of giving, stories of love, of communities coming together. While we hope this war ends as soon as possible, we call on the international community to fully support Israelis in their fight against terrorism. This is a war not only for Israel's future, but for the world's future. Instead of the world pressuring Israel to do what Hamas wants, the world should pressure Hamas to release all of the hostages and surrender unconditionally. Israel has every right and duty to defend its people against genocidal terrorist groups. This war is a tragedy that's already caused horrific suffering on the Palestinian side and on the Israeli side, because Hamas is murdering Israelis and at the same time using innocent Palestinians as human shields. Hamas terrorists and leaders hide, store weapons, and fire rockets from homes, schools, hospitals, and mosques. These are war crimes against Israelis and Palestinians alike. Remember, there is a right side and a wrong side in this war, and now more and more voices, even from inside Gaza, say the same.
شو بالنسبة لعون؟ هرجتوا مكان كان في خمرين ومن عندها سجون بس نسوان وأطفال نحن محبطان وعندنا زيت كملوا بالخمسة كملوا سياسة الوارفة عند الجنين الأكثر كملوا بس عذاب بتركيا بسنوار بده خدمات وين السنوار؟ نحن وين خالد المسعد؟ وين السنوار؟ وين أبو العطر؟ خلوكم هون.
Hamas is the evil force terrorizing both Israelis and Palestinians. Be on the right side of history. Don't fall for the lies. Think critically. Stand with your Jewish friends as they face antisemitism. Stand for peace and stand with Israel. My name is Noah, and this was Israel in Focus. Everything you need to know about the Hamas-Israel war. If you found this episode helpful and you want to continue being updated on all that's happening here in Israel, make sure to hit that subscribe button. For more details on the war from our Situation Room, including maps and full statistics, make sure to check the links in the comment section below. Thank you once again for watching, and remember, education is the real road to peace. Stand up to hatred, stand with Israel, and stand with us.